Disclaimer: this program contains graphic descriptions of real crimes. Viewer discretion is advised. All parties are presumed innocent until proven guilty in court. Daniel Harper didn't die alone. He died looking into the eyes of someone he loved. The last sound he heard wasn't the gunshot. It was a voice he trusted saying his name. And when police arrived at Riverside Park that cold October morning, they weren't just looking at a murder scene. They were looking at a betrayal so calculated, 3 different people tried to rewrite it. 3 witnesses, 3 stories, 1 dead body. October 14th, 6:42 a.m. The sun had barely risen when a jogger veered off the paved trail near Riverside Park. The air was damp, the grass still heavy with morning dew. She almost didn't notice him. A dark shape behind the shrubs, shoes visible first, one arm bent unnaturally at the elbow. She slowed down. "Sir?" she called out. No movement. Then she saw the blood. It had dried into the fabric of his shirt, a deep crimson stain over the center of his chest. His eyes were open, frozen, as if still trying to understand what had just happened. The jogger screamed. Within minutes, patrol cars flooded the park. Yellow tape stretched across walking paths. Crime scene technicians moved with quiet precision. The victim had no visible signs of robbery. His wallet was still in his pocket, his watch still on his wrist, his phone lying just inches from his hand. 1 gunshot wound to the chest, close range, clean, deliberate. Identification came quickly. Daniel Harper, 34 years old, local real estate investor, recently engaged. To most people, Daniel was ambitious, driven, charismatic. He built properties from the ground up and turned abandoned buildings into luxury condos. He was known for shaking hands firmly and remembering names. He had no criminal record, no known enemies, at least none that anyone was willing to admit. Detectives canvassed the area. No weapon recovered, no eyewitnesses came forward, but security footage from a nearby traffic light gave them a timeline. Daniel's car entered the side road near the park at 10:03 p.m. the night before. His phone pinged in the same location at 10:04. At 10:17 p.m., the phone shut off. No calls after that, no messages, nothing. Someone had ended the conversation. The autopsy would later confirm what the scene already suggested. The shooter stood directly in front of him, not hiding, not ambushing, face to face. Daniel knew who pulled the trigger, and in his final moments, there were no signs of struggle, no defensive wounds, which meant he didn't expect the gun to fire. Detectives began reconstructing his last day alive. 8:10 p.m., dinner reservation at La Miera Bistro. He wasn't alone. 3 names were attached to that reservation. 3 people who would soon sit across from detectives and swear they were only witnesses. Emily Carter, Marcus Reed, Ryan Cole. By midnight, all 3 had been contacted. By sunrise, their stories had already begun to unravel. Because what happened at that dinner table didn't stay there. It followed them to the park, and only one of them walked away without blood on their hands. The question wasn't whether they were involved.
The question was, who decided Daniel Harper wouldn't leave Riverside Park alive? And why the 3 people closest to him told 3 completely different versions of the same night. The truth was out there, buried beneath loyalty, beneath greed, beneath fear. And somewhere between those 3 stories was a single gunshot. 8:10 p.m. La Miera Bistro was warm, glowing in soft amber light. Outside, the city hummed with the comfort of routine. Inside, at a corner table near the back wall, Daniel Harper sat across from 3 people he believed he could trust. To anyone watching, it looked like a business meeting. 4 glasses, 4 plates, low conversation. But tension has a way of slipping through even the most polished smiles. Security footage shows Daniel arriving first. He checks his phone. He exhales slowly. Then Marcus Reed walks in. Firm handshake, brief eye contact, no hug. Moments later, Ryan Cole enters. He nods at Daniel, but avoids holding his gaze too long. And finally, Emily Carter, his fiancée. She sits beside Daniel, not across from him. That detail would matter later. The waiter approaches. Orders are placed. Wine is poured. From a distance, everything appears normal. But lip-reading analysts later reviewing the footage would pick up fragments. Daniel, we need to talk about the transfers. Marcus, this isn't the place. Emily, lower your voice. Ryan, let's just calm down. At 8:47 p.m., Daniel leans forward, his jaw tight. He places his phone face up on the table and turns the screen toward them. Whatever was on that screen changes the temperature of the table instantly. Marcus leans back in his chair. Emily crosses her arms. Ryan rubs his forehead. The conversation becomes sharper, faster. At 9:12 p.m., Daniel stands up, not to leave, to steady himself. He paces once beside the table, then sits again. The waiter returns briefly. No one touches their food. At 9:26 p.m., Marcus checks his watch. At 9:28 p.m., Ryan glances toward the exit. At 9:31 p.m., Emily reaches for Daniel's hand. He pulls it away. 9:32 p.m., Daniel leaves the restaurant, alone. Security footage shows him walking into the parking lot, shoulders stiff, movements deliberate. 30 seconds later, Marcus exits. Then Ryan. Emily remains inside for nearly 3 minutes after that. She stands by the window, watching. At 9:36 p.m., she leaves too. Detectives would later discover something critical. At 9:41 p.m., Daniel receives a call, 7 seconds long, from Emily. At 9:44 p.m., another call, this one from Marcus, missed. At 9:47 p.m., Daniel makes an outgoing call to Ryan. It lasts 22 seconds. What was said during those calls remains unknown, but what happened next is clear. At 10:03 p.m., Daniel's car turns onto the narrow service road leading into Riverside Park. At 10:04 p.m., his phone pings at the same location. At 10:05 p.m., another vehicle enters that same road, then another, then another. 3 separate cars, 3 separate arrivals. No one reported hearing a gunshot. No one reported a fight. But somewhere between 10:05 and 10:17 p.m., something shattered beyond repair. And when detectives began interviewing the 3 dinner companions, each one insisted the meeting ended at the restaurant. Each one claimed they went their separate ways. Each one denied going to the park. But traffic cameras don't lie. At 10:05 p.m., Marcus's SUV is seen turning toward Riverside. At 10:11 p.m., Emily's sedan follows. At 10:14 p.m., Ryan's car enters the same stretch of road. They didn't just share dinner, they shared a destination. The park wasn't random, it was arranged. The question was, who suggested it?
And who brought the gun? Because by 10:17 p.m., Daniel Harper's phone powered off. And by sunrise, he would be nothing more than a body behind the shrubs. 3 witnesses would soon sit across from detectives and swear they were nowhere near Riverside Park. But the cameras had already captured what they were trying to erase. They all followed him. The only thing left to determine was who followed him with intent to kill. By 9 a.m. the next morning, all 3 were seated in separate interrogation rooms. 3 witnesses, 3 versions of the same night, and already the timelines didn't match. Emily Carter went first. She arrived in soft gray sweats, eyes red, engagement ring still on her finger. She clutched a tissue as if it were the only thing keeping her steady. "I loved him," she said before detectives even asked a question. "We were getting married." Her voice cracked at all the right moments. According to Emily, dinner had been tense but not explosive. Daniel was stressed, she explained. He thought Marcus was mishandling money. He thought Ryan was hiding something. He kept saying people were betraying him. She insisted she left the restaurant alone and went straight home. "I didn't follow him. I didn't know where he went." Detective Alvarez slid a printed still image across the table. A traffic camera capture. Her car, turning toward Riverside Park at 10:11 p.m. Emily stared at the image. Silence. Then she inhaled slowly. "I just needed air," she whispered. "We argued after dinner. I called him. He sounded upset. I drove around to clear my head." "Did you meet him at the park?" "No." "Did you see him there?" "No." Her answers were quick now. Too quick. Marcus Reed sat straighter, composed, measured. He wore a navy suit despite the early hour. "Daniel was my partner," he said calmly. "We built everything together." Marcus claimed Daniel had become unstable in recent weeks. He accused us of stealing, of lying. It was paranoia. He admitted they argued at dinner, but when asked about Riverside Park, he leaned back in his chair. "I went home." Detectives placed the same type of photo in front of him. His SUV, captured at 10:05 p.m., entering the service road. Marcus's jaw tightened. "I drove past the park," he corrected. "I was heading home. The service road is a dead end." Silence. Then a slight shift. "Fine." He texted me, said he wanted to talk privately. I went. He wasn't there when I arrived. I left. "What time?" "Around 10:10. But Daniel's phone was still active at 10:17. Marcus's timeline had already collapsed. Ryan Cole was different. Nervous, his knee bounced under the metal table. He avoided eye contact. "I didn't kill him," he blurted out before detectives even began. They hadn't accused him. Ryan claimed dinner was the final attempt to smooth things over. "He thought we were conspiring against him," Ryan said. "It was ridiculous." When shown the traffic image of his car entering the park road at 10:14 p.m., his face drained of color. I went to check on him," he stammered. "Why?" "Because he sounded off on the phone. He wasn't making sense." "What did he say?" Ryan swallowed. "He said if something happened to him, it wouldn't be an accident." That statement froze the room. Detectives exchanged a glance. "Why would he say that?" Detective Alvarez asked. Ryan hesitated. "Because he thought someone was going to hurt him." "Who?" Ryan's lips parted, but no words came out. By noon, investigators laid the 3 timelines side by side. Emily claimed she drove aimlessly. Marcus claimed he arrived but left quickly. Ryan claimed he came to check on Daniel. But none of them admitted seeing each other there, which would have been possible if not for what came next.
A private security camera from a warehouse across the street from the park entrance captured more than just passing headlights. At 10:08 p.m., Marcus's SUV parked near the trees. At 10:10 p.m., Daniel's sedan headlights flicked off. At 10:12 p.m., Emily's car pulled in behind them. At 10:15 p.m., Ryan's vehicle arrived. All 4 cars were there at the same time, and none of them left until after 10:18 p.m. That meant one thing. They weren't arriving separately. They were meeting together. When detectives returned to the interrogation rooms with that footage, the atmosphere shifted. Emily's composure cracked first. "You don't understand," she said, her voice shaking. "He wasn't supposed to escalate it." "Escalate what?" She covered her mouth. Too late. Marcus grew colder. Ryan grew paler. 3 witnesses, 3 carefully rehearsed lies. But now the evidence showed something undeniable. This wasn't coincidence, it was coordination. And somewhere between 10:15 and 10:17 p.m., under a dim park streetlight, a conversation turned fatal. The only question left was who pulled the trigger and who decided that Daniel Harper would never leave that park alive. Because the lies weren't just inconsistent anymore, they were unraveling. And when lies unravel, so do alliances. The lies didn't collapse all at once. They cracked, slowly. And then all 3 realized the same thing. Someone was going to break first. Detectives separated them again. No phones, no contact, no time to rehearse. And this time, they didn't ask what happened. They asked what Daniel knew. It was Marcus who slipped. He wasn't supposed to check the secondary account, he muttered. Detective Alvarez didn't blink. What secondary account? Marcus froze. Too late. The forensic accounting team had already uncovered irregular transfers, small at first, 10,000 here, 15 there. Over 8 months, it added up to just over $600,000. The money moved from Harper and Reed Investments into a shell corporation, registered under a vague consulting name. But the paperwork traced back to 2 digital signatures, Marcus Reed and Ryan Cole. When confronted, Marcus shifted blame immediately. "It was Ryan's idea," he said. "Daniel was squeezing us. We deserved more." Did Emily know? A pause. Then, yes. Across the hall, Ryan was cracking too. "He found the transfers," Ryan admitted. "He showed us at dinner." "What did he say?" "He said he was going to the police." Ryan's breathing grew shallow. "He said he'd expose everything, the company, the fraud, all of it." "And Emily?" Ryan closed his eyes. She panicked. But it was Emily's interrogation that changed everything. Detectives placed printed bank records in front of her, then email transcripts, then incorporation documents. Her name was on more than they expected. She wasn't just aware, she helped file the paperwork. The shell company wasn't random. It was created 3 weeks after Daniel proposed. "You used his trust," Detective Alvarez said quietly. Emily's lips trembled. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she whispered. "What was supposed to happen?" Silence. Then tears. "He was just supposed to back down." The pieces aligned. Daniel discovered the embezzlement. He confronted them at dinner. That's why he put his phone on the table.
That's why the mood shifted at 8:47 p.m. He had proof, and he wanted answers. But dinner wasn't the end of the argument. It was the beginning. Phone records revealed a group call at 9:39 p.m. All 3 suspects connected for 42 seconds. 42 seconds. Long enough to decide something. At 9:58 p.m., Emily texted Daniel, "Let's talk somewhere private, please." At 10:01 p.m., he replied, "Fine, Riverside." He trusted her. That was the fatal mistake. Detectives reconstructed the final minutes. 10:05 p.m., Marcus arrives first. 10:10 p.m., Daniel exits his car. 10:12 p.m., Emily pulls in. 10:14 p.m., Ryan arrives. Under a single park streetlight, the confrontation resumed. Daniel accused them. Marcus deflected. Ryan tried to calm the situation. Emily begged Daniel not to destroy their lives. He refused.
According to Ryan's revised statement, Daniel said one sentence that changed everything. "I'm done protecting you." That meant prison. That meant public humiliation. That meant everything collapsing. And someone decided that wasn't an option. But detectives still needed proof of who pulled the trigger, because even now, each of them was pointing at someone else. Marcus claimed he never touched the weapon. Ryan claimed he tried to stop it. Emily claimed the gun just went off. But forensic evidence doesn't bend to emotion. Gunshot residue tests had been processed. Marcus, negative. Ryan, trace transfer. Emily, significant residue on both hands. And something else, her purse. Inside, investigators found a spare round of ammunition, same caliber as the fatal bullet, purchased 2 weeks earlier from a local sporting goods store. Security footage confirmed the buyer, Emily Carter. When confronted with that evidence, Marcus's loyalty cracked. "She bought it," he said flatly. "She said it was for protection." Ryan's voice broke next. She had it in her hand before he even finished talking. Back in the interrogation room, detectives placed the ammunition round on the table in front of Emily. No yelling, no threats, just silence. Her breathing became uneven. "He wasn't listening," she said. "To what? To reason? Or to you?" Her tears stopped. Her voice hardened. "He was going to ruin us." That word, us. Not me, not them. Us. The alliance was real. The fraud was shared. But the trigger belonged to one person. Detectives pressed further. What happened at 10:16 p.m.? Emily stared at the table. "He said he'd never look at me the same way again." And then he reached into his jacket. For what? I don't know. But the autopsy showed no weapon on Daniel, no knife, no gun, nothing. He wasn't reaching to attack. He was reaching, possibly for his phone, possibly for the voice memo investigators would later recover, which meant when Emily raised the gun, Daniel wasn't defending himself.
He was recording. The final piece was digital forensics. At 10:09 p.m., Daniel activated a voice memo. The recovered audio was fragmented. Wind, footsteps, voices layered over each other. Marcus, don't do this. Ryan, just talk. Emily, you weren't supposed to find out. Daniel, you stole from me. Then, a single gunshot, followed by silence. No struggle, no accidental discharge, just one clean shot. Center mass, execution distance. When detectives played the audio for Emily, something in her shifted. Not grief, not panic, resignation. He chose them over me, she whispered. No, Detective Alvarez replied softly. He chose the truth. Emily closed her eyes, and after 12 hours of denial, she finally said the words, "I pulled the trigger." Marcus and Ryan were charged with conspiracy, fraud, and accessory after the fact. But it was Emily, the fiancée, the woman who wore his ring, who lured him to that park, who stood directly in front of him, who raised the gun and ended his life. 3 witnesses, 3 stories, but in the end, only one confession, and one man who realized in his final seconds that betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes from the person standing closest to you. The confession made headlines within hours, but a confession doesn't close a case, it opens it wider. Because now investigators had to answer the question the public kept asking. Was it murder, or was it something darker? The prosecution built their case around 3 pillars: motive, planning, execution. The motive was financial, $600,000 siphoned from Daniel's company, but that wasn't the whole story. In the weeks before his death,
Daniel had quietly contacted a forensic auditor. He had scheduled a meeting with law enforcement, and most damaging of all, he had updated his will. Emily was no longer the sole beneficiary. That change was finalized 3 days before the dinner at La Mira Bistro. She didn't know, but she suspected. Phone data showed she searched one phrase 2 nights before the shooting. Can a fiancé contest a will? That search would later echo through a courtroom. The planning became clearer when detectives examined deleted messages from the group chat between Emily, Marcus, and Ryan. Recovered fragments revealed tension building days before the confrontation. Marcus, he's digging. Ryan, then we get ahead of it. Emily, let me talk to him first. Marcus, if he goes to police, we're done. Ryan, we meet, we end it. Those last 3 words would become the prosecution's anchor. We meet, we end it. Defense attorneys argued it meant end the argument. Prosecutors argued it meant something final. The execution was harder to dispute. Ballistics confirmed the bullet came from a legally purchased handgun registered to Emily Carter. There were no signs of a struggle, no misfire, no second shot, just one precise round, fired at close range, center chest. The medical examiner testified that Daniel likely remained conscious for several seconds, long enough to understand what had happened, long enough to see who did it. In court, the 3 of them avoided eye contact. Marcus sat rigid, jaw tight.
Ryan looked hollow, like sleep had abandoned him. Emily appeared smaller than before. But when the audio recording was played for the jury, everything changed. The courtroom fell silent as Daniel's voice filled the speakers. You stole from me. Wind rustled through the recording. Then Emily's voice. You weren't supposed to find out. Then the gunshot. Sharp, echoing, final. Several jurors flinched. One wiped away tears. Because what they heard wasn't chaos, it wasn't confusion, it was confrontation, followed by decision. The defense attempted to argue fear. They claimed Daniel reached into his jacket aggressively. They suggested Emily believed he might have been armed, but no weapon was found, no threatening text messages, no history of violence. Instead, prosecutors introduced one final piece of evidence. Daniel's voice memo had not stopped immediately after the gunshot. There were 3 additional seconds of audio, faint but audible. Footsteps. Then Marcus's voice. What did you do? And Emily's reply, barely above a whisper. He gave me no choice. Not it was an accident, not I didn't mean to. He gave me no choice. Choice. The word hung heavy in the courtroom because it confirmed what the evidence already suggested. This wasn't panic, it was a decision. Marcus eventually accepted a plea deal, 5 years for fraud and conspiracy. Ryan received 7 due to financial benefit and obstruction. But Emily Carter faced the full weight of the charge, first-degree murder. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, 6 hours to decide whether greed and fear justified pulling a trigger, 6 hours to determine whether betrayal deserved death. When they returned, no one looked surprised. Guilty on all counts. Emily showed no visible reaction. No tears, no collapse, just stillness, as if the outcome had been decided long before the verdict was spoken. Outside the courthouse, reporters repeated the phrase that had come to define the case. 3 witnesses, 3 stories, 1 dead body. But the real tragedy wasn't the fraud. It wasn't even the money. It was the trust. Daniel believed he was meeting the people closest to him for a difficult conversation. He thought it would end in arguments, maybe lawsuits, maybe broken relationships. He didn't think it would end in a gunshot under a streetlight.
He didn't think the person he planned to marry would raise a weapon against him. But betrayal rarely announces itself. It hides in shared secrets, in whispered group calls, in desperate decisions made in under a minute. And in the end, 3 people tried to rewrite 10 minutes of reality. But cameras recorded it, phones preserved it, forensics proved it, and a single gunshot told the truth. Years later, Riverside Park looks the same. The trees have grown taller, the grass has been replanted. Joggers pass by without knowing exactly where Daniel fell. But sometimes, when the wind moves just right beneath that lone streetlight, it carries an echo, not of the gunshot, but of the moment before it, the moment where a choice was made, and 3 witnesses became 3 conspirators. Because in the end, there weren't 3 stories. There was only one, and it ended the second Emily Carter pulled the trigger. There's something unsettling about cases like this, not because they're violent, not because they involve money, but because they force one uncomfortable question. How long had the betrayal been building? When investigators revisited the months leading up to Daniel's death, a pattern began to emerge. Small fractures, quiet arguments, subtle changes in behavior. Daniel's assistant testified that he had become withdrawn in the weeks before the shooting. He kept double-checking invoices, she said. He didn't trust the numbers anymore. He had changed passwords, requested independent audits, and, most telling, he began recording conversations, not openly, quietly, on his phone. The voice memo recovered from Riverside Park wasn't the only one. There were 5 others, all from the 2 weeks before his death. In one recording, Daniel can be heard arguing with Marcus in his office. "You think I won't notice $600,000 missing?" Daniel says. Marcus responds, "It's temporary, we're reinvesting." Another recording captures tension between Daniel and Emily. "You're choosing them over me," she says. "I'm choosing what's right," Daniel replies. The fracture wasn't sudden, it was growing, and the night at the park was simply where it finally snapped. This story isn't about the courtroom, it's about the psychology, because betrayal at this level requires something deeper than greed. It requires justification. During sentencing, Emily was given an opportunity to speak. She stood slowly, hands trembling, and addressed the court. "I didn't wake up planning to kill him," she said. "I felt cornered. I felt like everything we built was collapsing." She described fear, humiliation, the thought of prison, the loss of reputation, but never once did she say the word regret. When the judge asked directly if she felt remorse, she paused. "I regret that it happened," she said. "Not that she did it, that it happened." Language matters. Psychologists later analyzed her interrogation footage. They noted something chilling. Her emotional peaks aligned with financial exposure, not with Daniel's death. When discussing the fraud, she cried. When discussing the gunshot, she grew quiet, controlled, detached. Marcus, during his plea hearing, admitted he believed Emily would never actually fire the weapon. "I thought she just wanted leverage," he said. Ryan claimed he froze. "I didn't think she'd pull the trigger," he told the court. "I thought someone would stop it." But no one did, because in high-pressure moments, silence becomes participation, and hesitation becomes permission. 3 people stood under a streetlight. 1 raised a gun, 2 watched, and none of them walked away innocent. Years after the verdict, letters surfaced. Daniel had written one, dated 3 days before his death, addressed to his sister. In it, he wrote, "If anything happens to me, it won't be random. I trusted the wrong people, and I'm starting to see it clearly now." He never mailed it. It was found in his desk drawer, unsent, unanswered. That letter shifted public perception. Daniel wasn't blindsided, he was preparing.
But preparation didn't save him, because betrayal doesn't always come loudly. Sometimes it comes disguised as concern, as partnership, as love. Riverside Park eventually replaced the streetlight where Daniel fell. New pavement, new fixtures. No plaque, no memorial, just routine. Joggers, dog walkers, couples holding hands. Most have no idea what happened there. But investigators still reference the case during training sessions, not because it was the most violent, not because it was the most complex, but because it was the most human. 3 intelligent adults convinced themselves that one irreversible decision was easier than facing consequences. They told themselves it would solve the problem. Instead, it exposed everything. If you listen carefully to the recovered audio, just before the gunshot, there's a moment, half a second, where no one speaks. No wind, no movement, just silence. That silence is the space where a choice lived. The space where someone could have lowered the weapon, where someone could have stepped forward, where someone could have walked away, but they didn't. And that's what makes this case linger. Not the fraud, not the trial, not the headlines, but that half second of silence. 3 witnesses, 3 stories, 1 dead body, and 1 moment where everything could have been different, but wasn't. Time has a way of dulling headlines, but it doesn't dull consequences. 5 years after the verdict, the case of Daniel Harper is no longer front-page news. There are no reporters outside the prison gates, no cameras in Riverside Park, but the echoes remain. Marcus was released first. Good behavior, reduced sentence. He walked out of prison into a world that no longer trusted him. No investment firm would hire him. No partner would shake his hand. He gave 1 interview, just 1. In it, he said something revealing. We told ourselves it wasn't real until it was. He claimed he believed the gun was only meant to intimidate, that no one truly thought Emily would fire. But when asked why he didn't step in, why he didn't grab her arm, why he didn't shout, he had no answer. Silence, once again. Ryan served his sentence quietly. No interviews, no statements. But prison records showed multiple altercations in his first year. 1 incident report noted he reacted violently when another inmate said, "You helped kill your friend." Because that's the part that lingered. They weren't strangers. They weren't rivals from across town. They were friends, business partners,
A fiancé. And that made the betrayal heavier. Emily remains incarcerated. Her appeals were denied. Her defense argued ineffective counsel, emotional distress, fear of imminent harm. None of it overturned the evidence. In her most recent parole hearing transcript, she said, "I live with that night every day." But when the board asked if she accepted full responsibility, her answer was measured. "I accept that I pulled the trigger. Not that she planned it, not that she chose it, just that she pulled it." The distinction's still there, even years later. Daniel's family established a financial transparency foundation in his name, not for vengeance, for prevention. They funded seminars teaching business owners how to detect internal fraud. They spoke about trust, about oversight, about listening to instincts. Because Daniel had sensed something was wrong, he had documented it, prepared for it, but he underestimated how far people would go to protect themselves. True crime analysts often revisit this case for one reason. There was no mastermind, no criminal genius, no elaborate cover-up. Just 3 people cornered by exposure, and 1 irreversible decision made in under a second. Psychologists describe it as moral collapse under shared pressure. When responsibility diffuses across a group, accountability weakens. Each person believes someone else will intervene, someone else will stop it,
Someone else will take control, but no one does. And that's how ordinary people become part of extraordinary crimes. Investigators later revealed something rarely discussed publicly. When they reconstructed the final positions under the streetlight, they determined something chilling. Marcus stood slightly behind Daniel, Ryan off to the side, Emily directly in front, which meant when she raised the gun, Daniel's last view wasn't of an enemy, it was of the woman he planned to marry. And behind him, two men he once called brothers. He was surrounded, not attacked from the shadows, surrounded by familiarity. That realization is what makes this case endure, because it forces a question most people don't want to ask. How well do you really know the people closest to you? There is one final detail. During evidence review, investigators discovered Daniel's phone battery did not die at 10:17 p.m. It was manually powered off. Someone pressed and held the button, waited for the screen to fade, ensured the recording stopped. That action required calm. It required intention. It happened after the gunshot, after the shock, after the realization of what had been done. Someone stepped forward and chose silence. They never proved which of the three did it, but it didn't matter. By then, they were unified in one thing: protecting themselves. Riverside Park still stands. The streetlight hums softly at night. Cars pass by. Conversations happen. Arguments flare. And most end without tragedy, because most people step back before the point of no return. Most people lower the weapon. Most people choose consequence over catastrophe. But on October 14th, 3 people didn't. 3 witnesses, 3 stories, 1 dead body, and a single moment.
Where silence became complicity, where fear became motive, where love became lethal, and where a man who trusted the wrong people learned the truth too late. Some cases end with a verdict, others end with a confession, but a few end with a question that never fully goes away. 10 years later, the case of Daniel Harper is still taught in criminal psychology courses, not because of its complexity, but because of its simplicity. No masks, no elaborate alibis, no hidden assassin, just a dinner, an argument, a meeting under a streetlight, and one decision that could not be undone. Students studying the case often focus on one chilling reality. All 4 of them drove to that park voluntarily. No one was forced, no one was ambushed. Daniel believed he was walking into a conversation. Emily believed she was walking into control. Marcus believed he was walking into negotiation. Ryan believed he was walking into damage control. But when pressure peaks, people reveal who they are. And under that single streetlight, truth surfaced. Not in words, in action. There's a theory investigators discussed privately but never needed to prove in court. What if the plan was never to kill him? What if the plan was to intimidate him into silence? The gun changes the dynamic. It shifts power instantly. But guns also remove margin for error. When emotion spikes, triggers tighten, seconds shrink, choices narrow, and lives end. Daniel's final recorded words were not angry. They were disappointed. You stole from me. Not, I'll destroy you. Not, I hate you. Just betrayal. And betrayal, when exposed publicly, feels worse than punishment. For some people, worse than prison, worse than shame, worse than consequence, because betrayal strips identity. It forces someone to see themselves clearly, and not everyone survives that reflection. Investigators often replayed the final 3 seconds after the gunshot. Footsteps, breathing, then the phone powering down. That final act remains symbolic because it represents the moment they shifted from shock to strategy. They didn't call an ambulance. They didn't attempt CPR. They didn't stay.
They didn't confess. They turned off the evidence and drove away separately. 3 cars, 3 directions, 3 future lies forming in real time. In interviews years later, one detective said something that stayed with many who studied the case. Most murders start with hatred. This one started with fear. Fear of exposure, fear of collapse, fear of losing everything. And fear, when shared, becomes dangerous because it spreads responsibility thin. Each person feels less accountable. Each person assumes someone else will stop the worst from happening. But under that streetlight, no one did. There is no memorial plaque at Riverside Park, no flowers, no engraved stone. But Daniel's story lives on in quiet warnings, in business seminars, in ethics courses, in criminal psychology textbooks, and in the minds of anyone who hears it and thinks, that could never happen in my circle. That's what makes it powerful, because Daniel probably thought the same thing. If you stand beneath that streetlight at night, it feels ordinary. Cars pass, wind moves through trees, nothing suggests violence, and that's the final lesson. Evil rarely announces itself. It doesn't always look monstrous. Sometimes it looks like a fiancé, a business partner, a lifelong friend, standing in front of you, smiling, until the moment they aren't. 3 witnesses, 3 stories, 1 dead body. But in the end, there was never really 3 versions of the truth. There was just one. A confrontation about stolen money, a gun raised in desperation, 2 men frozen by fear, and a single shot that turned betrayal into murder. Daniel Harper walked into Riverside Park believing he was confronting dishonesty. He didn't realize he was confronting mortality.
And in the final half second before the trigger was pulled, there was still time. Time to lower the weapon. Time to walk away. Time to choose differently. But that's the thing about irreversible moments. You don't know they're irreversible until they are. This wasn't just a story about fraud or greed or even murder. It was a story about trust. About what happens when trust fractures under pressure. About how quickly alliances can turn lethal. And about how silence in the wrong moment can cost a life. 3 witnesses, 3 lies, 1 decision, 1 gunshot, and 1 truth that no one could turn off, no matter how many stories they tried to tell. Cases close, files are archived, evidence is boxed. But some stories don't end when the courtroom empties. They settle into memory. They resurface in quiet moments, and they leave questions that refuse to disappear. Years after the verdict, detectives involved in the Harper case were asked one recurring question. Was it really just about the money? $600,000, a failing development project, a shell company. On paper, it was financial fraud spiraling out of control. But when investigators reviewed everything again, the recordings, the texts, the body language and surveillance footage, they noticed something deeper: control. At dinner, Daniel wasn't just confronting theft, he was reclaiming authority. He had proof, he had leverage, and for the first time in months, he wasn't the one being manipulated. That shift mattered, because the people across that table had grown comfortable operating in the shadows, and when light hits people who aren't ready for it, some react violently. A behavioral analyst who reviewed the interrogation tapes years later made an observation that changed how the case was discussed in academic circles. Emily didn't react like someone who snapped. She reacted like someone who lost control of a narrative. Her statements repeatedly circled back to one phrase: he wasn't supposed to find out. Not, I didn't mean to hurt him. Not, I was afraid. But he wasn't supposed to know. The tragedy wasn't exposure, it was discovery. That distinction speaks volumes. Marcus eventually rebuilt a quiet life in another state, different industry,
different name in some circles. But those who knew the case say he still avoids eye contact when Riverside Park is mentioned, because even if he didn't pull the trigger, he stood there. He didn't step forward. He didn't knock the gun away. And in legal terms, that made him guilty of conspiracy. But in human terms, it made him a bystander to a preventable death. Ryan faded almost completely from public record. No interviews, no public statements. And in the final half second before the trigger was pulled, there was still time. Time to lower the weapon. Time to walk away. Time to choose differently. But that's the thing about irreversible moments. You don't know they're irreversible until they are. This wasn't just a story about fraud or greed or even murder. It was a story about trust, about what happens when trust fractures under pressure, about how quickly alliances can turn lethal, and about how silence in the wrong moment can cost a life. 3 witnesses, 3 lies, 1 decision, 1 gunshot, and 1 truth that no one could turn off, no matter how many stories they tried to tell. Cases close, files are archived, evidence is boxed. But some stories don't end when the courtroom empties. They settle into memory. They resurface in quiet moments, and they leave questions that refuse to disappear. Years after the verdict, detectives involved in the Harper case were asked one recurring question. Was it really just about the money? $600,000, a failing development project, a shell company. On paper, it was financial fraud spiraling out of control. But when investigators reviewed everything again, the recordings, the texts, the body language and surveillance footage, they noticed something deeper: control. At dinner, Daniel wasn't just confronting theft, he was reclaiming authority. He had proof, he had leverage, and for the first time in months, he wasn't the one being manipulated. That shift mattered, because the people across that table had grown comfortable operating in the shadows, and when light hits people who aren't ready for it, some react violently. A behavioral analyst who reviewed the interrogation tapes years later made an observation that changed how the case was discussed in academic circles. Emily didn't react like someone who snapped. She reacted like someone who lost control of a narrative. Her statements repeatedly circled back to one phrase: he wasn't supposed to find out. Not, I didn't mean to hurt him. Not, I was afraid. But he wasn't supposed to know. The tragedy wasn't exposure, it was discovery. That distinction speaks volumes. Marcus eventually rebuilt a quiet life in another state, different industry, different name in some circles. But those who knew the case say he still avoids eye contact when Riverside Park is mentioned, because even if he didn't pull the trigger, he stood there. He didn't step forward. He didn't knock the gun away. And in legal terms, that made him guilty of conspiracy. But in human terms, it made him a bystander to a preventable death. Ryan faded almost completely from public record. No interviews, no public statements.
But one prison counselor wrote in a report, he expresses remorse not for the fraud, but for freezing. Freezing. It's a word that comes up often in high-stress situations. Fight, flight, freeze. He froze. And in that half second, someone else didn't. Daniel's sister visits Riverside Park once a year. Not with cameras, not with reporters, just quietly. She once said in an interview, the hardest part isn't the gunshot, it's knowing he trusted them until the very end. Trust is invisible. You can't measure it, you can't document it, you can only feel it. And Daniel felt it enough to agree to that final meeting, even after discovering the fraud, even after suspecting deception. He still showed up. That's what makes this story unsettling, because most people believe trust protects them, but sometimes it exposes them. There was one final digital detail discovered long after the trial concluded: cloud backups. Daniel had enabled automatic syncing for his notes. In a draft folder, investigators found a sentence typed hours before dinner. If this ends badly, At least I stood up for myself. He expected confrontation. He expected fallout. He didn't expect death. When criminology experts revisit this case, they often frame it not as premeditated evil, but as escalating fear meeting opportunity. The gun didn't create the motive. It accelerated the outcome. Had there been no weapon, there would have been shouting, threats, maybe lawsuits, maybe arrests, but not a body under a streetlight. The presence of a firearm transformed a conflict into a fatal point of no return. And that's the quiet warning embedded in this case. Conflict plus fear plus a weapon leaves no space for reconsideration. Today, if you search Daniel Harper's name, you'll find articles, case summaries, legal breakdowns, but what you won't find is closure. Because closure suggests peace, and there is nothing peaceful about a betrayal that unfolds face to face. 3 witnesses, 3 stories, 1 dead body, and beneath it all, 1 moment where 3 people could have chosen differently. 1 moment where a hand could have lowered a weapon, but they didn't. And that is why this case endures, not because of its complexity, not because of its publicity, but because it feels close.
It feels possible. It feels human. And that's what makes it haunting. Because the most disturbing crimes aren't committed by monsters hiding in darkness. They're committed by ordinary people, standing under a streetlight, convincing themselves they have no other choice, when they always did. By the time the courtrooms emptied and the press cameras moved on, Riverside Park had returned to its quiet routine. The streetlight that had witnessed betrayal and death hummed softly at night, illuminating nothing but ordinary paths. But beneath that quiet, the echoes of that night never fully disappeared. For Emily Carter, prison became a space of reflection, or at least of time. Letters she wrote to family were carefully composed, emotionally guarded. "I live with it every day," she once admitted in a monitored conversation. Not the guilt, not the remorse, but the inevitability of what she had done. The weight of choice. Marcus and Ryan returned to civilian life, each haunted in their own way. Marcus avoided Riverside Park entirely, refusing interviews, refusing to discuss the past. Ryan lived quietly, but counselors noted the lingering guilt. The word freeze appeared repeatedly in his prison files. Freeze, because that split-second hesitation became a decision of its own. It's the most human of mistakes, the most ordinary of crimes. Daniel Harper's family channeled grief into action. They established the Harper Integrity Foundation, teaching young entrepreneurs about ethics, transparency, and oversight. Daniel had trusted people who betrayed him. They taught others not to make the same mistake. For investigators, the case remained an example of moral collapse under pressure. Fear, greed, silence. When combined, ordinary people can make irreversible decisions. 3 witnesses, 3 stories, 1 dead body, and a single irreversible choice. Because sometimes, trust doesn't protect you. Sometimes, it kills you. And maybe that's what makes this case so disturbing. Not the gun, not the lies, not even the betrayal, but the fact that every single person under that streetlight believed they were justified. 3 witnesses, 3 stories, 1 dead body. And somewhere between fear and pride, a decision was made that could never be undone. So here's the question that lingers. If you had been standing there that night, would you have spoken up? Would you have stepped in? Or would you have frozen too? Because the truth is, most crimes don't begin with violence. They begin with silence. This has been Murder Book 360, where we don't just tell the story, we examine the choices behind it. If you found this case compelling, subscribe and turn on notifications. There's always another file waiting to be opened. And remember, trust carefully, choose wisely, because one moment is all it takes.
I'll see you in the next case.